What if everything you believe, your senses, your memories, even the physical world around you, could be an illusion? One man dared to doubt everything, only to find one unshakable truth that would change philosophy forever. This is the radical mind of Rene Descartes. Rene Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, the mathematician who gave us the Cartesian coordinate system, and the thinker who declared, "I think, therefore I am." But beyond this famous phrase lies a revolutionary approach to knowledge itself. Today, we're diving deep into Descartes' core principles, his method of systematic doubt, his rationalist philosophy, his mind-body dualism, and his quest to rebuild all human knowledge on foundations that cannot be shaken. Let's explore the philosophy that broke with centuries of tradition and laid the groundwork for the modern scientific age. Born on March 31st, 1596, in France during a time of religious wars and intellectual upheaval, Descartes grew up in a world where traditional scholastic Aristotelian philosophy dominated academic thought. He was educated by Jesuits and later studied law, but he felt deeply unsatisfied with the education he received. He found it filled with doubtful opinions rather than certain knowledge. This dissatisfaction wasn't just academic frustration. It became the driving force of his life's work. Descartes spent much of his adult life in the Dutch Republic, where intellectual freedom allowed him to develop his revolutionary ideas. He initially served in the Dutch State's army, and it was during a winter retreat in 1619 that he experienced a series of vivid dreams that convinced him of his philosophical mission: to unify all sciences under a single method of reasoning. Unlike the philosophers before him who relied heavily on sensory experience and ancient authorities, Descartes wanted to start from scratch. He sought to demolish all his previously held beliefs and rebuild them on a foundation so solid that nothing could shake it. This wasn't just philosophy, it was an intellectual revolution. Principle 1. The method of systematic doubt. Rene Descartes' method of systematic doubt, also known as methodological skepticism or hyperbolic doubt, stands as one of the most audacious and transformative philosophical techniques ever conceived. This principle represents far more than a simple questioning of beliefs. It embodies a complete intellectual revolution that fundamentally changed how philosophers and scientists approach the pursuit of knowledge. The foundation of Descartes' approach emerged from a profound personal realization. In his Meditations on First Philosophy, published in 1641, Descartes opens by reflecting on a troubling discovery. Throughout his life, he had accepted countless beliefs as true that turned out to be false. He recognized that the entire structure of his knowledge resembled a building constructed on shaky foundations. Any belief system built upon uncertain premises would inevitably contain flaws and errors, no matter how carefully reasoned the subsequent conclusions might be. This realization led him to an extraordinary decision. He would undertake the monumental task of demolishing his entire belief system and rebuilding it from scratch, this time on absolutely unshakable foundations. The genius of Descartes' method lies not in its destructiveness, but in its strategic purpose. Unlike skeptics who doubt for the sake of doubting alone, Descartes employed doubt as a precision tool, a philosophical instrument designed to separate certain knowledge from uncertain opinions. His goal was constructive: to clear away the debris of doubtful beliefs so that the solid bedrock of absolute certainty could be revealed. Think of it as an archaeologist carefully removing layers of sediment to uncover ancient treasures beneath, or a master sculptor chipping away excess marble to reveal the perfect form within the stone. The scope of Descartes' doubt was breathtakingly comprehensive. His strategy was to consider any belief that could be doubted, even slightly, even hypothetically, as if it were false. This wasn't about proving every belief wrong. Rather, it was about applying the most stringent possible standard for truth. If there existed even the smallest possibility that a belief might be false, that possibility alone was sufficient grounds to temporarily set the belief aside. This approach represented a radical departure from the philosophical tradition of his time, which relied heavily on the authority of ancient texts, religious doctrine, and common-sense assumptions about the world. To execute this method efficiently, Descartes recognized that he didn't need to examine every individual belief he held, a task that would take a lifetime and likely prove impossible. Instead, he employed an ingenious architectural metaphor. Just as undermining the foundation of a building causes the entire structure to collapse, Descartes reasoned that if he could cast doubt on the fundamental sources and principles upon which all his beliefs rested, then all beliefs derived from those sources would simultaneously fall into doubt. This approach transformed an overwhelming task into a manageable one by targeting the roots rather than every individual branch of his belief system. The first wave of Descartes' systematic doubt focused on sensory experience, which most people consider the most reliable source of knowledge about the world. After all, seeing is believing, as the common saying goes. However, Descartes observed that our senses sometimes deceive us. Consider optical illusions that trick the eye, or how a straight stick appears bent when partially submerged in water. Think about how distant towers might look round when they're actually square, or how small objects far away can be misjudged in size. Descartes argued that if our senses have deceived us even once, we have good reason to question whether they might be deceiving us all the time. It would be unwise, he suggested, to place complete trust in something that has proven unreliable on previous occasions. Yet this argument from sensory error had its limits. While we might be deceived about small or distant objects, surely we can trust our senses about immediate, obvious facts. Descartes acknowledged that it seems absurd to doubt that he was sitting by the fire in his dressing gown, holding paper in his hands, or that he possessed hands and a body at all. Only someone experiencing serious mental confusion would doubt such obvious, immediate experiences. This recognition led Descartes to deploy an even more powerful skeptical weapon, the dream argument. The dream argument strikes at the very heart of our confidence in distinguishing reality from illusion. Descartes pointed out that during dreams, we often have experiences that feel completely real and indistinguishable from waking life. In our dreams, we might believe we're sitting by a fire, walking through a garden, or conversing with friends. And while dreaming, these experiences carry the full weight of reality. We don't know we're dreaming until we wake up. The crucial problem is this. At any given moment, how can you be absolutely certain that you're not dreaming right now? What marks of certainty exist that definitively separate waking experience from dreaming? Descartes concluded that there are no such marks, that dreams can be so vivid and coherent that they're experientially identical to waking life. Therefore, any belief based on sensory experience, no matter how immediate or obvious, could potentially be part of a dream, and thus cannot serve as an absolutely certain foundation for knowledge. Modern audiences might recognize this concept from films like The Matrix or Inception, which explore similar themes about the impossibility of distinguishing simulated reality from genuine experience. These contemporary stories demonstrate the enduring power and relevance of Descartes' insight. Yet even the dream argument had its boundaries. Descartes acknowledged that while sensory experiences might be illusory, certain abstract truths seem to hold regardless of whether we're awake or dreaming. Mathematical and logical truths appear immune to this type of doubt. Whether awake or asleep, 2 plus 3 equals 5, squares have 4 sides, and circles are round. These truths about mathematics, geometry, and logic don't depend on the existence of physical objects or the reliability of our senses. They seem to represent pure, abstract knowledge that would remain true even in the most elaborate dream. To challenge even these apparently unshakable truths, Descartes introduced his most extreme and famous skeptical hypothesis: the possibility of an all-powerful deceiver. Initially, he considered whether God, being all-powerful, could have created him in such a way that he was systematically deceived about everything, even basic mathematical truths. However, this formulation was theologically dangerous in the intensely religious climate of 17th century Europe. The suggestion that God might be a deceiver contradicted the fundamental religious belief in God's perfect goodness. To avoid potential accusations of heresy, while maintaining the full force of his skeptical argument, Descartes reframed the hypothesis. Instead of a deceptive God, He asked readers to suppose the existence of an evil demon, an entity of immense power and cunning whose sole purpose is to deceive. This malicious demon uses all its considerable abilities to create elaborate illusions, feeding false experiences and even false intuitions directly into the mind. Under this hypothesis, there might be no external world at all, no earth, no sky, no physical objects, no other people. Everything perceived through the senses could be an elaborate fabrication. The demon might even manipulate basic reasoning itself, causing errors in mathematical calculations or logical deductions. The evil demon hypothesis, also called the malicious demon hypothesis, represents the ultimate expression of hyperbolic doubt. It pushes skepticism to its absolute logical limit. This thought experiment asks, if such a powerful deceiver existed, what, if anything, could you still know with absolute certainty? The evil demon's scenario might seem fantastical, but it serves a crucial philosophical function. It establishes the highest possible standard for certain knowledge. Only beliefs that remain true, even in the face of this extreme hypothesis, qualify as absolutely certain. Everything else, no matter how plausible or intuitive, must be set aside as potentially doubtful. The revolutionary impact of Descartes' method extends far beyond the specific arguments he made. He fundamentally shifted the burden of proof in philosophy and science. Before Descartes, the dominant approach relied heavily on ancient authorities, particularly Aristotle, and on established tradition. If a belief had been held for centuries or was taught in prestigious universities, that carried significant weight. Descartes swept all of this aside. Authority, tradition, common sense, and intuitive plausibility. None of these mattered unless a belief could withstand systematic doubt. Every claim to knowledge had to prove itself through this rigorous test. This methodological shift had profound implications for the development of modern science. Descartes' insistence on doubting received wisdom and demanding rigorous proof helped establish the critical, questioning attitude that characterizes scientific inquiry. Rather than accepting claims based on authority, scientists learned to demand empirical evidence, logical coherence, and reproducible results. The scientific method itself can be seen as a descendant of Cartesian doubt, a systematic process of questioning hypotheses, testing them against reality, and accepting only those that survive rigorous scrutiny. Moreover, Descartes' method established individualism at the heart of intellectual inquiry. Each person must undertake the journey of doubt for themselves, using their own rational faculties to determine what can be known with certainty. Knowledge cannot simply be inherited from teachers or absorbed from books. It must be personally validated through rational examination. This emphasis on individual rational autonomy became a cornerstone of Enlightenment philosophy and modern democratic thought. The method of systematic doubt also introduced a new understanding of what knowledge actually means. For Descartes, true knowledge required not just probable truth or practical reliability, but absolute certainty, the kind of certainty that could withstand even the most extreme skeptical scenarios. This extraordinarily high standard for knowledge raised the philosophical stakes considerably. While earlier philosophers might have been satisfied with well-supported beliefs, Descartes demanded foundations that were utterly immune to doubt. This quest for absolute certainty became a defining characteristic of modern philosophy, influencing thinkers for centuries to come. It's important to understand that Descartes never actually believed he was dreaming or being deceived by an evil demon. These scenarios were hypothetical tools, thought experiments designed to test the limits of certainty. The doubt was methodological rather than genuine or permanent. Descartes wielded doubt as a temporary measure, a kind of intellectual housecleaning meant to clear away questionable beliefs so that genuine, certain knowledge could be established. His ultimate goal was not skepticism but certainty, not the destruction of knowledge, but its reconstruction on firmer foundations than had ever existed before. This principle of systematic doubt remains relevant today in numerous fields. Critical thinking courses teach students to question assumptions and examine evidence carefully. Scientists continue to challenge established theories and seek more fundamental explanations. Even in everyday life, we recognize the wisdom of questioning what we think we know, remaining open to new evidence, and building our understanding on solid reasoning rather than mere habit or tradition. Through his method of systematic doubt, Descartes gave humanity a powerful tool for intellectual progress. He showed that questioning everything, far from being destructive, could be the path to greater certainty and deeper understanding. By daring to doubt absolutely everything, he created the possibility of knowing something absolutely. And in doing so, he changed philosophy, science, and human thought forever. Principle 2. Cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. From the swirling depths of radical doubt, where every belief seemed vulnerable to skepticism and nothing appeared solid enough to stand upon, Rene Descartes made perhaps the most remarkable philosophical discovery in Western intellectual history. After systematically doubting everything, his senses, his memories, mathematical truths, even the external world itself, he discovered one truth that proved absolutely impossible to doubt: his own existence as a thinking being. This discovery crystallized into the most famous phrase in philosophy: cogito, ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. The brilliance of this insight emerges from understanding the impossibility of doubting it. Even if Descartes entertained the extreme hypothesis of an all-powerful evil demon deliberately deceiving him about absolutely everything, even if every single perception and thought were false, even if the entire universe were an elaborate illusion, the very act of being deceived would require that he exist to be deceived. The demon could manipulate his perceptions, corrupt his reasoning, and fabricate an entirely false reality, but it could never manipulate him into believing he exists when he doesn't, because the act of manipulation itself requires a subject to manipulate. There must be something there to be tricked. Consider the elegant logic of this realization. If you doubt your own existence, you must exist to do the doubting. If you wonder whether you're real, there must be a you doing the wondering. Doubting is a form of thinking, and thinking requires a thinker. The very process of questioning your existence proves that existence beyond any possibility of error. This isn't just probable or highly likely. It's logically impossible for the statement, I think, therefore I am, to be false when you're thinking it. The Latin phrase cogito, ergo sum, translates most literally as I think, therefore I am, though philosophers have debated whether a clearer translation might be, I am thinking, therefore I exist. This subtle difference in translation highlights an important aspect of Descartes' insight. It's not about thinking as an abstract capability, but about the immediate, present act of thinking. Whenever you are engaged in thought, right now, in this moment, your existence is absolutely certain. As Descartes himself wrote, I exist, is necessarily true each time that I pronounce it, or that I mentally conceive it. What makes the cogito so philosophically revolutionary is that it represents genuine certainty in a way that nothing else can. After Descartes had cast doubt on sensory experience, which can be illusory, memory, which can be false, and even mathematical reasoning, which an evil demon might corrupt, he finally found a belief that withstood every possible skeptical challenge. The cogito became the one fixed point in a universe of doubt, the single solid foundation upon which he could attempt to rebuild all human knowledge. It represented the starting point, the unshakable bedrock that could support the entire edifice of certain knowledge. Descartes presented this insight most famously in two works. In his earlier Discourse on the Method, published in 1637, he stated it as, I think, therefore I am. Later, in his more rigorous Meditations on First Philosophy, published in 1641, he rephrased it slightly as, I am, I exist. This change in wording reflected his deeper philosophical rigor in the Meditations, where even the logical inference implied by therefore might be questioned during the process of radical doubt. In the most extreme state of skepticism, where even reasoning itself is under suspicion, Descartes couldn't rely on a logical argument moving from premise to conclusion. Instead, the cogito represents an immediate self-evident intuition. The moment you grasp it, you know it with complete certainty. This brings us to a crucial philosophical point about the nature of the cogito. It's not technically an argument in the traditional sense. Descartes isn't reasoning from I think as a premise to I am as a conclusion through a logical inference. Rather, the cogito expresses a direct, immediate awareness, what philosophers call an intuition. The existence of thought and the existence of the thinker are grasped simultaneously in a single moment of self-awareness. You don't first observe that you're thinking and then deduce that you must exist. The awareness of your thought and the awareness of your existence are one and the same insight. This immediacy is part of what makes the cogito indubitable. There's no chain of reasoning that could be flawed, no gap where error could creep in. The personal nature of the cogito adds another fascinating dimension to its philosophical significance. The certainty it provides is inherently first person and present tense. You can be absolutely certain of your own existence when you're thinking about it right now, but you cannot have that same ironclad certainty about anyone else's existence, or even about your own existence in the past or future. If you were to change the phrase to third person, Descartes thinks, therefore he exists, it loses its indubitable quality. You could be mistaken about whether Descartes is really thinking. Maybe you're hallucinating the whole scenario. Similarly, if you change the tense, I was thinking yesterday, therefore I existed yesterday, doubt creeps back in. Maybe your memory is false. Maybe yesterday never happened. Only in the immediate, first-person present does the cogito maintain its absolute certainty. I am thinking right now, therefore I exist right now. This principle established something profoundly important about the nature of knowledge and consciousness. The cogito demonstrates that consciousness and thought occupy a privileged epistemic position. They're self-intimating in a way that nothing else is. You can be deceived about the external world, about your body, about other minds, about the past and future, but you cannot be deceived about the immediate fact of your own thinking. This revelation placed consciousness at the very center of philosophical inquiry. Before Descartes, philosophical systems often started with assumptions about God, nature, or the external world. After Descartes, the thinking subject became the undeniable starting point for all knowledge. The significance of the cogito extends deeply into questions of personal identity and the nature of the self. If thinking is the one thing Descartes could be absolutely certain about, and if existence is proven through thinking, then thinking must be the fundamental essence of what he is. As Descartes himself concluded, he is essentially a thing which thinks, a residential cogitans. His identity as a conscious mind was more certain than his identity as a physical body. Indeed, he realized he could conceive of himself existing without a body, perhaps as a disembodied mind, but he could not conceive of himself existing without thought. If he stopped thinking entirely, he would have no way to confirm his continued existence. This insight would later form a crucial part of his argument for mind-body dualism. The idea that mind and body are fundamentally different kinds of substances. The cogito also established thinking itself as the defining characteristic of human existence. For Descartes, consciousness and thought weren't just features that humans happen to possess. They constituted the very core of what it means to be. This represented a radical shift in how philosophers understood human nature. Rather than defining humans primarily through physical characteristics, social relationships, rational souls granted by God, or our place in a cosmic hierarchy, Descartes identified us first and foremost through our capacity for conscious thought. This emphasis on consciousness as fundamental to existence would influence centuries of subsequent philosophy, from debates about personal identity and the nature of the self, to contemporary discussions in philosophy of mind about the relationship between consciousness and physical processes. However, Descartes acknowledged something important about the cogito. While it proved that he existed, it didn't immediately tell him what he was. The statement, I am, I exist, establishes existence with certainty, but the nature of that I remained to be determined. Descartes wrote, "But I do not yet have a sufficient understanding of what this I is, that now necessarily exists." This opened up rich philosophical territory for exploration. What is the thinking thing that exists? Is it a physical brain? An immaterial soul? Something else entirely? The cogito proved existence, but left the essence of that existence as a question requiring further investigation. The implications of the cogito rippled through subsequent philosophy in profound ways. By establishing absolute certainty about one's own consciousness while leaving everything else, including the external world and other minds, in doubt, Descartes inadvertently created what's known as the problem of the external world. If we start from the certainty of our own thoughts and experiences, how do we ever get beyond them to establish the existence of anything outside our minds? This question has occupied philosophers ever since, leading to various forms of idealism, the view that only minds and their contents truly exist, as well as ongoing debates about solipsism, the position that one can only be certain of one's own mind's existence. The cogito also fundamentally changed epistemology, the philosophical study of knowledge. Descartes set an extraordinarily high bar for what counts as genuine knowledge: absolute certainty, immunity to any possible doubt. While most subsequent philosophers have agreed that the cogito meets this standard, they've debated whether anything else can. Does knowledge really require this kind of ironclad certainty? Or can we know things even when there's some theoretical possibility of error? Contemporary epistemology has largely embraced fallibilism, the view that we can have knowledge even without absolute certainty. But Descartes' quest for certainty continues to inform debates about the nature and standards of knowledge. The historical influence of "I think, therefore I am" can hardly be overstated. It became not just a philosophical principle, but a cultural touchstone, recognized far beyond academic philosophy. The phrase appears in literature, popular culture, and everyday discourse as shorthand for the fundamental human capacity for self-awareness. Its influence on Western thought extends into multiple domains. It helped inaugurate modern philosophy with its emphasis on individual rational inquiry. It influenced Enlightenment ideals about the power and autonomy of human reason, and it continues to inform contemporary discussions about consciousness, artificial intelligence, and the nature of personhood. Interestingly, while the cogito is most associated with Descartes, similar insights appeared in earlier philosophical traditions. Over 1,000 years before Descartes, Saint Augustine wrote Fulla ergo sum. "I am mistaken, therefore I am," expressing a similar recognition that the act of thinking, even incorrect thinking, proves existence. However, Descartes developed this insight more systematically and placed it more centrally in his philosophical system, which is why he receives credit for the cogito as we understand it today. The cogito also raises fascinating questions that philosophers continue to explore. Can unconscious mental processes generate their own version of the cogito? If artificial intelligence systems could think, would they be able to establish their own existence through a computational version of "I compute, therefore I am"? Does the cogito apply only to thinking specifically, or to any mental state? I feel, therefore I am. I perceive, therefore I am. I desire, therefore I am. These variations all seem to carry similar certainty, suggesting that the real insight of the cogito concerns consciousness and mental states generally, not just thinking in the narrow sense. Through the cogito, Descartes achieved something remarkable. He found an island of absolute certainty in an ocean of doubt. In the midst of the most extreme skepticism imaginable, where everything could be questioned and nothing seemed secure, he discovered that the act of questioning itself provided unshakable proof of existence. This insight transformed philosophy by making consciousness and self-awareness the starting point for all inquiry into knowledge and reality. Whether or not we accept Descartes' subsequent philosophical system, the fundamental insight of the cogito remains. In the immediate awareness of our own thinking, we encounter something that cannot be doubted, something absolutely and indubitably certain. The profound simplicity and undeniable truth of "I think, therefore I am" continues to captivate philosophers, students, and thoughtful people everywhere. It reminds us that even when everything else seems uncertain, even when we question the nature of reality itself, the fact of our own conscious existence remains beyond doubt. In those three simple Latin words, cogito, ergo sum, Descartes captured something fundamental about the human condition. We are, first and foremost, thinking beings aware of our own existence. Principle 3. Clear and distinct perceptions as the criterion of truth. Having established his own existence through the cogito, I think, therefore I am, Rene Descartes found himself in a peculiar philosophical predicament. He had proven with absolute certainty that he existed as a thinking being, but nothing else seemed certain. He remained trapped in what philosophers call solipsism, the possibility that only he and his thoughts existed, while everything else, the external world, other minds, mathematical truths, even God, might be elaborate illusions. To escape this intellectual isolation and rebuild the edifice of human knowledge, Descartes needed a reliable method for distinguishing truth from falsehood. His solution became one of the most influential epistemological principles in Western philosophy, the criterion of clear and distinct perception. The foundation of this principle emerged directly from reflecting on the cogito itself. Descartes asked himself a crucial question. What makes the cogito, I think therefore I am, so certain that it cannot be doubted? What distinguishes this one belief from all the others that fell victim to systematic doubt? His answer lay in the unique quality of how he perceived this truth. The cogito possessed a special character, a distinctive clarity and distinctness that made it impossible to deny while contemplating it. As Descartes himself wrote in his third meditation, in this first item of knowledge there is simply a clear and distinct perception of what I am asserting. This would not be enough to make me certain of the truth of the matter, if it could ever turn out that something that I perceived with such clarity and distinctness was false. From this reflection, Descartes derived what he called the clarity and distinctness rule, often abbreviated as the C&D rule by philosophers. The principle states elegantly, whatever is perceived very clearly and distinctly is true. This criterion became the cornerstone of Descartes' epistemology, the standard by which all claims to knowledge would be evaluated. If a perception met the criteria of being both clear and distinct, it could be accepted as genuinely true. If it lacked these qualities, it remained doubtful and should be withheld from assent. But what exactly did Descartes mean by clear and distinct? These technical terms, while related, carried specific and different meanings in his philosophical system. In his Principles of Philosophy, Descartes provided explicit definitions for both concepts. A perception is clear, he explained, when it is present and manifest to an attentive mind. Just as we say we clearly see objects that are directly present to our focused gaze and act upon our vision sufficiently strongly and manifestly. Clarity refers to the immediacy and obviousness of a perception when the mind attends to it carefully. Clear perceptions stand out vividly in consciousness, impossible to miss or confuse when you're paying attention. A perception is distinct, on the other hand, when it is so separated and delineated from all others that it contains absolutely nothing except what is clear. Distinctness means that the perception is sharply differentiated from everything else, with precise boundaries and no mixture of confused or unclear elements. A distinct idea contains only what truly belongs to it and excludes everything foreign or extraneous. An idea can be clear without being distinct. For instance, pain is clear when you feel it, but it may not be distinct if you cannot precisely identify its nature, location, or cause. However, an idea cannot be truly distinct without also being clear, because distinctness requires clarity as its foundation. To grasp these concepts more concretely, consider mathematical and geometric truths, which Descartes regarded as paradigm examples of clear and distinct perceptions. When you understand that 2 + 3 = 5, this truth presents itself with perfect clarity. It's immediately obvious to an attentive mind. Moreover, it's perfectly distinct. The idea contains exactly what it needs to contain, and nothing more. You cannot confuse this mathematical truth with anything else, nor can you doubt it while you're actually contemplating it. Similarly, geometric principles like a triangle has 3 sides, or the shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line, possess the same crystalline clarity and distinctness. The nature of clear and distinct perceptions reveals something profound about how Descartes understood knowledge acquisition. Unlike sensory experiences, which can be confused, ambiguous, or deceptive, clear and distinct perceptions arise from the pure intellect, the rational faculty of the mind operating independently of the senses. Descartes distinguished sharply between two mental operations in his rules for the direction of the mind: intuition and deduction. Intuition represents the immediate, direct grasp of clear and distinct truths by an unclouded and attentive mind. It's not the fluctuating testimony of the senses or the misleading judgments of imagination, but rather the conception of truth so evident and distinct that no room remains for doubt. Through intuition, the mind can directly apprehend certain fundamental truths. Descartes provided several examples. Everyone can mentally intuit that they exist, that they are thinking, that a triangle is bounded by 3 lines, and that a sphere has a single surface. These intuitions don't require proof or demonstration. They present themselves as self-evidently true to the attentive intellect. The evidence of intuition is so direct and immediate that it cannot be doubted, making intuition the most important operation of Descartes' method and the paradigmatic example of certain and evident cognition. Deduction represents the second fundamental operation of the rational mind. While intuition grasps truths immediately, deduction arrives at truths through a chain of reasoning, where each step is itself intuitively certain. If you start from clear and distinct intuitions and proceed through steps that are themselves clear and distinct, the conclusion you reach will also be certain. This process mirrors the method of geometric demonstration, where complex theorems are proven by logical deduction from simple, self-evident axioms. Descartes admired geometry precisely because its propositions aren't merely probable conjectures, but absolutely certain truths, immune to doubt. The psychological character of clear and distinct perceptions deserves special attention. A clear and distinct perception is one to which you cannot fail to assent while you're entertaining it. So long as you're actively contemplating the notion, you cannot coherently doubt it without landing yourself in logical incoherence. This irresistible quality distinguishes genuine clear and distinct perceptions from mere strong convictions or firmly held beliefs. Many people feel absolutely certain about things that turn out to be false, but genuine clear and distinct perceptions carry an objective mark of truth, not just subjective certainty. Consider propositions like, "Nothing can exist and not exist at the same time," or "Every effect must have a cause." When you truly understand what these statements mean and attend to them carefully, you find yourself unable to doubt them. The assent they command isn't based on external authority, habit, or wishful thinking. It flows directly from the nature of the ideas themselves as grasped by the rational intellect. This direct, immediate certainty makes clear and distinct perceptions qualitatively different from sensory experiences or imaginative constructions, which always remain potentially doubtful. This principle positioned Descartes firmly as a rationalist, a philosopher who maintains that reason, rather than sensory experience, is the primary and most reliable source of knowledge. Rationalism contrasts with empiricism, the view that knowledge derives fundamentally from sensory experience. For Descartes, the senses could never provide the kind of absolute certainty that philosophy and science require. Sensory experiences are confused, unreliable, and vulnerable to illusion. Only the rational intellect, operating through clear and distinct perceptions, can grasp genuine, certain truths. The rationalist implications extended to Descartes' views about innate ideas. He believed that the capacity for certain clear and distinct perceptions, particularly mathematical and logical truths, must be innate to the human mind rather than acquired through experience. The mind comes pre-equipped with the ability to grasp these fundamental truths through pure reason. Experience might trigger or occasion these insights, but it doesn't create them. This doctrine of innate ideas became a defining feature of rationalist philosophy and a point of major dispute with later empiricist philosophers. The scope of clear and distinct perceptions encompasses various types of knowledge. Mathematical truths clearly qualify Equations, geometric principles, and arithmetic facts all exhibit the requisite clarity and distinctness. Logical principles like the law of non-contradiction, something cannot both be and not be at the same time, also meet the standard. Metaphysical truths that Descartes derives through careful reasoning, such as his own existence, the existence of God, and the real distinction between mind and body, he claims to perceive clearly and distinctly. Even certain fundamental principles of physics and the material world, once properly understood through reason rather than confused sensory experience, can achieve this status. However, Descartes acknowledged an important limitation of clear and distinct perceptions. While you cannot doubt them during the moment you're actively contemplating them, once they fall out of your immediate awareness, doubt can potentially creep back in. You might stop actively entertaining the proposition that 2 + 2 = 4, and only remember the conclusion you reached earlier. Later, you might wonder whether your reasoning was as rigorous as you thought, or whether perhaps an evil demon manipulated your thinking process. If doubt can keep returning whenever a clear and distinct perception leaves immediate awareness, the criterion wouldn't provide the stable, lasting foundation for knowledge that Descartes sought. This challenge led Descartes to invoke God as the ultimate guarantor of clear and distinct perceptions. He argued that God created human beings, and therefore also created our faculty of reason. God is infinitely perfect, and an infinitely perfect being cannot be deceitful. If our clear and distinct perceptions were systematically unreliable, God would be a deceiver, which contradicts divine perfection. Therefore, we can trust that our clear and distinct perceptions are true, not only in the moment we perceive them, but also when we remember having perceived them clearly and distinctly. God's veracity validates our cognitive faculties and allows us to build up a systematic body of stable, lasting knowledge. The clarity and distinctness criterion fundamentally transformed the philosophical landscape. By establishing a purely rational standard for truth that didn't depend on sensory experience, tradition, or authority, Descartes empowered individual thinkers to evaluate claims for themselves. No longer could philosophers appeal merely to ancient texts or established doctrines. Every claim had to withstand the test of being clearly and distinctly perceived by the rational intellect. This democratizing impulse, where each rational mind had direct access to truth through its own cognitive faculties, became a hallmark of Enlightenment thought. The principle also established an extremely high standard for genuine knowledge. Descartes wasn't satisfied with probable beliefs, practical certainty, or well-supported hypotheses. He demanded absolute, indubitable truth. Only perceptions that met the stringent criteria of clarity and distinctness qualified as true knowledge. Everything else, no matter how plausible or useful, remained in the realm of opinion rather than genuine science. This uncompromising quest for certainty influenced subsequent philosophy profoundly, establishing the questions and standards that philosophers would grapple with for centuries. Through the criterion of clear and distinct perceptions, Descartes provided a bridge from the isolated certainty of the cogito to broader knowledge of reality. Armed with this principle, he could begin to rebuild human knowledge systematically, first establishing God's existence, then validating the general reliability of clear and distinct perceptions, then demonstrating the real distinction between mind and body, and finally developing a comprehensive physics and natural philosophy. The entire edifice of Cartesian philosophy rests on this foundation, the conviction that the human rational intellect, through clear and distinct perception, has direct access to truth. Principle 4. The existence of God as the guarantor of truth. Having established the criterion of clear and distinct perception as the hallmark of truth, Rene Descartes confronted a profound philosophical challenge that threatened to undermine his entire epistemological project. While he could not doubt his clear and distinct perceptions in the very moment he entertained them, a troubling question arose. How could he be confident in conclusions reached through clear and distinct reasoning once those perceptions faded from immediate awareness? Could an evil demon manipulate his memory of what he had perceived clearly and distinctly, or corrupt his reasoning processes themselves? To secure lasting certainty and escape the shadow of hyperbolic doubt permanently, Descartes needed an ultimate guarantor of truth. Something that would validate not just momentary insights, but the entire enterprise of rational inquiry. His solution was both philosophically bold and theologically profound. He set out to prove God's existence and establish God as the foundation for all human knowledge. Descartes offered multiple proofs for God's existence, each rooted in different starting points, but converging toward the same conclusion. The most prominent of these arguments in his Meditations on First Philosophy is the causal argument, which relies on a fundamental metaphysical principle he inherited from medieval scholastic philosophy, the causal adequacy principle. This principle, rooted in ancient and medieval thought, states that a cause must possess at least as much reality, perfection, or being as its effect. In other words, you cannot get more out of a cause than is already present in it in some form. An effect cannot exceed its cause in degrees of reality or perfection. The argument begins with Descartes examining the various ideas present in his mind. Among these mental contents, he discovers something remarkable: the idea of an infinite, supremely perfect being, God. This idea represents a being possessing all perfections to an infinite degree. Infinite knowledge, infinite power, infinite goodness, eternal existence, and absolute perfection in every conceivable way. Descartes then poses a critical question. Where could this idea have come from? What could be the cause of his possessing such an extraordinary idea? Descartes systematically eliminates various possible sources. Could he himself be the cause of this idea? Could he have invented it or constructed it from his own mental resources? Descartes argues emphatically that this is impossible. He recognizes himself as a finite, imperfect being. He doubts, he makes mistakes, his knowledge is limited, his power is constrained, and he exists contingently rather than necessarily. An imperfect, finite mind lacks the reality and perfection necessary to produce the idea of infinite perfection. According to the causal adequacy principle, the cause must have at least as much perfection as the effect it produces. Since the idea of God represents infinite perfection, only something with infinite perfection could be its adequate cause. The argument can be formulated more precisely. Descartes distinguishes between two types of reality that ideas possess. Formal reality refers to the actual existence that something has, the being it possesses, as a thing in itself. Objective reality refers to the representational content of an idea, what the idea is about or represents. A picture of a mountain has formal reality as a physical picture, and objective reality insofar as it represents a mountain. Now, ideas themselves have formal reality as mental states, but they also have objective reality based on what they represent. The idea of God has tremendous objective reality because it represents an infinitely perfect being. The causal principle states that the objective reality contained in an idea must derive from something with at least as much formal reality. Since the objective reality of the idea of God is infinite, only an actually existing infinite being, God himself, could be its adequate cause. Could Descartes have constructed the idea of God by extrapolation, perhaps by taking finite qualities he experiences and imagining them extended to infinity? Descartes rejects this possibility as well. He argues that the idea of infinite perfection is qualitatively different from merely negating or extending finite qualities. To truly understand infinity requires more than just imagining finitude stretched further and further. It requires grasping something fundamentally beyond the finite realm. Moreover, Descartes insists that he perceives God's infinity positively and directly, not merely as the absence of limits. The idea of infinite perfection must therefore have been placed in him by an actually infinite being, like a craftsman's mark stamped upon his creation. This version of the argument is sometimes called the trademark argument, because God's idea functions like a signature or trademark impressed upon the human mind. Descartes also offered a second major proof for God's existence, the ontological argument, which approaches the question from a purely conceptual angle. This argument, which has roots in medieval philosopher Saint Anselm's work, claims that God's existence follows directly from the very concept of God. When you properly understand what God is, a supremely perfect being, you recognize that existence must be one of God's essential attributes. Just as it belongs to the essence of a triangle to have three sides, or to the essence of a mountain to involve a valley, so it belongs to God's essence to exist. You cannot conceive of God, a being possessing all perfections, without existence, because existence is itself a perfection. A God who didn't exist would lack a perfection, and therefore wouldn't be God. Therefore, Descartes argues, God's existence is as certain as mathematical truths. It's perceivable with the same clarity and distinctness as geometric demonstrations. Having established God's existence through these rational arguments, Descartes proceeds to his crucial next move, demonstrating that God cannot be a deceiver. This conclusion flows from God's perfect nature. Descartes argues that the will or desire to practice deception is evidence of malice or weakness, both of which are imperfections. Since God possesses all perfections and no imperfections by definition, God cannot have any inclination toward deception. To conceive of God as a deceiver would involve a logical contradiction. It would mean conceiving of a being who simultaneously possesses all perfections, by being God, and lacks at least one perfection, by being a deceiver. This would be as impossible as conceiving of a mountain without a valley or a triangle without three sides. This conclusion about God's non-deceiving nature becomes the cornerstone of Descartes' entire epistemological system. God created human beings and gave them their cognitive faculties, including the capacity for rational thought and clear and distinct perception. If these God-given faculties systematically led people into error, if clear and distinct perceptions could be false, then God would be responsible for deception. But since God cannot be a deceiver, it follows that the cognitive capacities God gave humans must be fundamentally reliable when used properly. Clear and distinct perceptions must be true because a non-deceiving God would not have created humans with faculties that systematically mislead them when functioning as designed. Thus God becomes the ultimate guarantor of truth in Descartes' philosophy. With God's existence and veracity established, Descartes can finally escape the evil demon hypothesis completely. The evil demon scenario was predicated on the possibility that some powerful being might be systematically deceiving him. But now Descartes has proven that an infinitely perfect God exists, and such a God would not permit systematic deception. God's existence and goodness guarantee that when humans use their rational faculties correctly, when they restrict their assent to clear and distinct perceptions, they will arrive at truth. This divine guarantee extends beyond just the immediate moment of perception. Even when Descartes no longer actively contemplates a clear and distinct perception, even when he merely remembers having perceived something clearly and distinctly in the past, he can now trust that conclusion. God's veracity ensures that memory of clear and distinct perceptions remains reliable. This allows Descartes to build up complex chains of reasoning over time, developing systematic knowledge through step-by-step deductions, confident that the conclusions reached through proper reasoning will remain true even after the reasoning process concludes. However, Descartes' solution to the problem of doubt generated its own philosophical controversy, one that has persisted for nearly 4 centuries: the problem of the Cartesian circle. Critics, beginning with Descartes' own contemporaries, identified what appeared to be circular reasoning at the heart of his epistemology. The circularity takes this form. Descartes uses clear and distinct perceptions to prove God's existence, through both the causal and ontological arguments, but then appeals to God's existence and veracity to validate the reliability of clear and distinct perceptions. In other words, he seems to rely on the very thing he's trying to prove. The objection was first raised by Marin Mersenne, and later developed more fully by Antoine Arnauld, after whom the circle is sometimes named Arnauld's circle. Arnauld pointed out that Descartes claimed not to be certain of anything until he established God's existence, yet he relied on the certainty of clear and distinct perceptions to prove that God exists. If clear and distinct perceptions need God to guarantee their truth, how can they be used reliably to prove God's existence in the first place? The apparent structure of the argument seems to be: Clear and distinct perceptions are reliable because God exists and is no deceiver, and God exists because I perceive his existence clearly and distinctly. This looks suspiciously like using premise A to prove conclusion B, then using conclusion B to prove premise A, a classic circular argument. Descartes offered several responses to this charge of circularity. His primary defense, often called the memory response, distinguishes between perceptions that are currently before the mind and those that are merely remembered. Descartes argued that while you are actually attending to a clear and distinct perception, it carries its own immediate certainty. No external guarantee is needed. The cogito itself exemplifies this. While thinking I think, therefore I am, the truth is self-evident and indubitable. God's guarantee is only necessary for validating perceptions once they fall out of immediate awareness, and must be relied upon through memory. When actually perceiving God's existence clearly and distinctly, that perception carries its own certainty. God's veracity then validates trusting that perception later. Additionally, Descartes emphasized that the cogito is not an inference or deduction, but an immediate intuition. He explicitly denies that I think, therefore I am, involves reasoning from a premise to a conclusion through logical steps. Instead, it represents a direct, self-evident recognition that cannot be doubted while entertained. This immediate, intuitive certainty doesn't require any external validation, not even God's guarantee, because it's self-validating in the moment of its apprehension. Modern philosophers have debated extensively whether Descartes successfully escaped the charge of circularity. Some commentators, like Bernard Williams, argue that while the circle can be avoided through careful interpretation, the real problem lies elsewhere. The proofs for God's existence themselves are unconvincing and fail to establish their conclusion with the certainty Descartes claimed. Others, like Harry Frankfurt, suggest that Descartes' arguments should be understood not as attempting to prove conclusions about reality, but rather as demonstrating that reason, when followed consistently, leads to belief in God and validates itself. On this interpretation, reason confirms its own validity rather than relying on an external foundation. Regardless of whether the Cartesian circle represents a genuine flaw in Descartes' system, the role of God in his epistemology reveals something profound about his philosophical project. Descartes sought absolute certainty, knowledge that could withstand any possible doubt. To achieve this extraordinary goal, he needed a foundation beyond the human mind itself, something that could guarantee that rational inquiry genuinely accesses truth rather than merely human constructions. God served this foundational role, connecting human reason to objective reality and ensuring that the mind's clearest insights correspond to how things actually are. Without this divine guarantee, Descartes believed, knowledge would remain trapped in uncertainty, vulnerable to skeptical doubts about whether our reasoning genuinely reveals truth or merely produces psychologically compelling illusions. Through his proofs of God's existence and the establishment of divine veracity as the ultimate guarantor of knowledge, Descartes attempted to secure the entire edifice of human knowledge on an unshakable foundation. Whether or not his arguments succeed, they represent a remarkable philosophical achievement, an ambitious attempt to ground all certainty in a rational demonstration of ultimate reality, connecting the human capacity for clear and distinct perception with the perfect nature of an infinite, benevolent creator. Principle 5. Mind-body dualism. Among Rene Descartes' many revolutionary philosophical contributions, perhaps none has proven more enduringly influential, or more hotly debated, than his doctrine of substance dualism, the radical proposition that mind and body constitute two fundamentally different kinds of substances with completely distinct natures. This principle didn't merely introduce a new theory into philosophical discourse. It fundamentally reshaped how subsequent generations would conceive of consciousness, personal identity, the nature of reality, and the relationship between the mental and physical realms. Descartes' dualism established a conceptual framework that continues to influence philosophy of mind, neuroscience, psychology, and even everyday discourse about the mind-brain relationship more than 3.5 centuries after his death. At the heart of Cartesian dualism lies a stark ontological division. Descartes identified two fundamentally different categories of substance in the created universe: residential cogitans, thinking substance, and residential extensa, extended substance. These Latin terms, which became technical vocabulary in philosophy, designate substances with completely opposite essential natures. The term substance itself carried specific meaning in Descartes' philosophical system. It referred to something that can exist independently, requiring nothing else except God's creative and sustaining power to maintain its existence. A substance doesn't depend on other created things for its being. It stands alone as a fundamental unit of reality. Residential cogitans, or thinking substance, constitutes the essence of mind or soul. The defining characteristic, the very essence, of mental substance is thought, understood broadly to encompass all forms of conscious mental activity. When Descartes used the term thought, he meant it in a comprehensive sense that included doubting, understanding, affirming, denying, willing, refusing, imagining, and perceiving, essentially any form of conscious mental experience. The mind, as residential cogitans, is fundamentally characterized by consciousness and awareness. Crucially, thinking substance possesses no spatial extension whatsoever. The mind occupies no physical space, has no location in the material world, possesses no dimensions, and cannot be measured in meters or centimeters. It exists as a purely mental, non-physical reality. Residential extensa, or extended substance, represents the essence of body and all physical matter. The defining characteristic of physical substance is extension in three-dimensional space. To be extended means to occupy space, to have length, width, and depth, to possess a location that can be specified with coordinates. Bodies are, by their very nature, spatial entities that exist in the physical world. According to Descartes, material substance possesses characteristic properties like size, shape, motion, and position. Critically, residential extensa is entirely devoid of thought, consciousness, or any mental properties whatsoever. Physical matter, in Descartes' view, operates purely mechanically, following laws of motion and contact, without any inherent mental dimension. The mutual exclusivity of these two substances could hardly be more complete. Mind and body share absolutely no properties in common. What characterizes one is precisely what the other lacks. The mind thinks but doesn't extend. The body extends but doesn't think. This radical opposition meant that mind and body represent two entirely different kinds of reality, as fundamentally distinct as any two things could possibly be. Descartes supported his dualistic thesis through several arguments, the most famous of which appears in his sixth meditation. The argument proceeds from his criterion of clear and distinct perception. Descartes claimed that he could clearly and distinctly conceive of himself as a thinking thing, existing without any body whatsoever. He could imagine himself as a pure consciousness, a disembodied mind, floating in existence without any physical form. Conversely, he could clearly and distinctly conceive of his body as an extended thing, existing without any mind. After all, the material world contains countless bodies, stones, plants, inanimate objects, that exist without possessing consciousness or thought. According to Descartes' epistemology, whatever can be clearly and distinctly conceived as separate must be capable of existing separately. If God chose to do so, he could create a mind without a body, or a body without a mind. This logical possibility of independent existence demonstrates that mind and body are really distinct substances. They are not two aspects of one thing, nor two modes of a single substance, but genuinely different kinds of beings. The real distinction means that each could exist without the other, even if they don't actually exist separately in human beings. Descartes offered a second argument based on the property of divisibility. This reasoning exploited a fundamental difference between mental and physical substances. Any extended thing, any body, is by its very nature divisible. Take any physical object, and you can conceptually or actually divide it into parts. Cut a piece of paper in half, and you have two pieces of paper. Break a stone, and you create multiple stone fragments. The divisibility of bodies follows necessarily from their spatial extension. Wherever there is extension, there must be parts that could be separated. The mind, by contrast, appears utterly indivisible. When Descartes introspected and examined his own consciousness, he couldn't perceive any parts or divisions within his mind. Consciousness seems to be a unified, single thing rather than a composite made of separate components. Moreover, the very concept of dividing a mind seems incoherent. If you could divide your mind in half, would you create two separate consciousnesses, two separate I's? Such a notion appears absurd. Yourself, your consciousness, your I is fundamentally one. According to the logical principle known as Leibniz's law, if two things have different properties, they cannot be identical. Since body possesses the property of divisibility and mind possesses the property of indivisibility, they cannot be the same thing. They must be completely different substances. This real distinction carried profound implications for questions of personal identity and immortality. If the mind and body are truly separate substances, and if the mind's essence is thought rather than extension, then the mind doesn't require a body to exist. The immaterial soul could, in principle, survive the death and disintegration of the physical body. While Descartes acknowledged that proving actual immortality would require additional arguments beyond just establishing the real distinction, his dualism at least made immortality conceptually possible in a way that materialist theories could not. This provided a rational foundation for religious hope in an afterlife. Descartes' dualism also served important scientific motivations. By completely separating mind from matter, Descartes cleared the way for a purely mechanistic physics that could explain physical phenomena without invoking mental properties, purposes, or final causes. The material world could be understood as a vast machine operating according to mathematical laws of motion and contact. This mechanistic worldview, freed from any element of mentality in physical nature, helped inaugurate the scientific revolution and modern physics. However, Descartes' radical separation of mind and body immediately generated what has become known as the mind-body problem or the interaction problem, perhaps the most famous and enduring difficulty in philosophy of mind. The problem arises directly from the complete diversity of mental and physical natures. If mind and body are utterly different kinds of substances, sharing no properties in common, how can they possibly interact with each other? Yet human experience provides undeniable evidence that mind and body do interact constantly. Consider voluntary bodily movement. When you decide to raise your hand, your mental act of willing, a mode of the non-extended mind, somehow causes your physical arm, a mode of extended body, to move upward. The mental event, the decision, the volition, produces a physical effect, the bodily movement. But how can this happen when mind has no extension, no spatial location, and no physical properties? Physical causation seems to require contact between surfaces. One billiard ball strikes another and sets it in motion through physical contact. Yet the mind, being non-extended, has no surface that could make contact with the body. Without a point of contact, how can the mind cause bodily movements? The reverse direction of causation poses equally perplexing questions. Physical events in the body clearly produce mental effects, sensations, perceptions, feelings. When light strikes your eyes, complex physical processes occur. Light waves hit the retina, photoreceptors fire, electrical signals travel along the optic nerve, and various neural processes unfold in the brain. Somehow, these purely physical events in your visual system culminate in the mental experience of seeing, the conscious visual sensation of colors, shapes, and objects. But how can movements of physical particles, no matter how complex, give rise to conscious experience when the mind is completely non-physical and cannot receive modes of motion? The gap between brain events and conscious experience seems unbridgeable if mind and matter are completely different substances. Descartes attempted to address this interaction problem by proposing a specific anatomical location where mind-body interaction occurs. The pineal gland, in Latin, the glandula pinealis or cornarium. This small, pine cone-shaped structure located near the center of the brain became, in Descartes' theory, the principal seat of the soul. The unique point where the immaterial mind connects with the material body. Descartes chose the pineal gland for several reasons. First, unlike most brain structures which exist in paired left and right hemispheres, the pineal gland is single and undivided. Since we have unified conscious experience, seeing one image with two eyes, hearing one sound with two ears, experiencing one coherent stream of thought, Descartes reasoned that the seat of consciousness must be a single, unified structure. Second, the pineal gland is centrally located in the brain, positioned at the confluence of various neural pathways. Third, Descartes believed it was small, light, and easily movable, which would facilitate mind-body interaction. According to Descartes' theory, the soul could move the pineal gland through direct volition, and these movements would redirect the flow of animal spirits, fine, volatile substances that Descartes imagined flowing through hollow nerves, to various muscles, thereby producing bodily movements. Conversely, sensory stimulation would cause patterns in these animal spirits that would move the pineal gland in ways that produced corresponding sensations in the soul. The pineal gland thus served as the interface, the meeting point where mental and physical causation somehow occurred. However, Descartes' pineal gland solution has been almost universally judged inadequate by subsequent philosophers and scientists. First, his basic anatomical assumptions were mistaken even by the standards of his own time. The pineal gland is not suspended in the middle of the brain's ventricles as Descartes thought, nor is it particularly mobile. Second, and more fundamentally, proposing the pineal gland as the site of interaction doesn't actually solve the conceptual problem. The pineal gland is itself a physical structure, part of residential extensor. The fundamental question remains: how can a non-extended, non-spatial mind move a physical gland, no matter how small or centrally located it might be? Specifying a particular anatomical location doesn't explain how causation between utterly different substances is possible. The mystery of mind-body interaction remains as deep as ever. The interaction problem proved so challenging that it generated numerous alternative philosophical theories in subsequent centuries. Some philosophers, like Malebranche and later occasionalists, denied that mind and body interact at all. Instead, God coordinates mental and physical events on each occasion when interaction appears to occur. Others, like Leibniz, proposed pre-established harmony. God created mind and body to run in parallel like synchronized clocks, giving the appearance of interaction without actual causal connection. Still others abandoned dualism entirely, either embracing materialism, everything is physical, including the mind, or idealism, everything is mental, including what appears to be physical matter. Despite these persistent difficulties, Descartes' mind-body dualism left an indelible mark on Western thought. The conceptual vocabulary he introduced, residential cogitans and res extensa, the distinction between mental and physical substances, the mind-body problem, continues to structure debates in philosophy of mind. Contemporary discussions about consciousness, the hard problem of explaining subjective experience, the relationship between mental states and brain states, and questions about personal identity and survival all bear the imprint of Cartesian dualism. Even those who reject dualism must contend with the powerful intuition that Descartes articulated. That conscious experience seems fundamentally different in kind from physical processes, that there appears to be an explanatory gap between objective brain events and subjective mental experiences. The enduring influence of Cartesian dualism extends beyond academic philosophy into everyday language and thought. When people speak of mind and body as separate things, when they wonder how thoughts can cause actions, when they speculate about consciousness existing independently of the brain, they are operating within the conceptual framework that Descartes established. Whether ultimately correct or mistaken, Descartes' doctrine of substance dualism fundamentally shaped how Western civilization thinks about the nature of mind, body, consciousness, and the self. Principle 6. Mechanistic physics and the material world. Having successfully established God's existence and validated the reliability of clear and distinct perceptions, Rene Descartes turned his attention to reconstructing knowledge of the physical world on secure foundations. The result was one of the most revolutionary developments in the history of science. A comprehensive mechanistic model of physics in which all physical phenomena, from the motion of planets to the properties of salt, from the behavior of light to the workings of living bodies, could be explained entirely through matter in motion, governed by precise mathematical laws. This mechanistic worldview didn't merely offer a new theory about nature. It represented a complete transformation in how humans understood and investigated the physical universe. The essence of Descartes' mechanical philosophy lay in its radical simplicity and explanatory power. According to this framework, the entire material world consists of nothing but matter and motion. All the seemingly complex, diverse phenomena we observe in nature, colors, sounds, tastes, heat, cold, magnetism, growth, and countless other qualities, ultimately reduced to just three fundamental properties: size, shape, and motion. Every physical event, no matter how intricate or mysterious it might initially appear, can be explained by describing how particles of matter with various sizes and shapes move, collide, and interact with one another according to fixed laws. The universe, in Descartes' vision, operates like an immensely complex but ultimately comprehensible machine. This mechanistic vision emerged from Descartes' deliberate and systematic rejection of Aristotelian scholastic physics, which had dominated European intellectual life for centuries. The Aristotelian framework explained natural phenomena through substantial forms and final causes. The notion that things possess inherent purposes or goals that explain their behavior. For example, scholastic philosophers would explain why a stone falls to the ground by appealing to the stone's substantial form, which included a natural tendency or purpose to move toward the center of the earth. This explanation implied, bizarrely from Descartes' perspective, that the stone somehow possessed knowledge of where the Earth's center was and how to get there. How could an inanimate object have knowledge or purposes when it doesn't think? Descartes found such explanations intellectually bankrupt. They failed to provide genuine understanding or predictive power. Saying that a stone falls because its nature is to fall toward the center of the Earth doesn't reveal anything new or useful about stones, gravity, or motion. It merely restates the observed phenomenon in different words, while attributing mental properties to mindless matter. In his sixth replies, Descartes explicitly criticized this confusion of mental and physical properties, arguing that substantial forms resulted from mistakenly mixing the idea of body with the idea of mind. Physical matter, being part of residential extensor, possesses no mental characteristics whatsoever. No knowledge, no purposes, no goals, no intentions. Moreover, the scholastic reliance on final causes introduced teleology, purpose-driven explanation, into physics in ways that Descartes found both presumptuous and scientifically sterile. To claim that we can discern God's purposes in creating nature seemed arrogant to Descartes. Human minds cannot penetrate the infinite divine intellect to discover why God arranged the universe as he did. More importantly, focusing on alleged purposes diverted attention from discovering the actual mechanical causes that produce observable effects. Cartesian physics therefore systematically excluded final causes, purposes, and substantial forms from physical explanation, replacing them with purely mechanical causation through contact, impact, and motion. In place of Aristotelian metaphysics, Descartes proposed an elegant alternative. The physical world consists entirely of one kind of substance, residential extensor, or extended substance, whose essential nature is three-dimensional spatial extension. Matter and space are identical. Wherever there is spatial extension, there is matter, and wherever there is matter, there is spatial extension. This identification eliminated the possibility of empty space or vacuum. The entire universe must be a plenum, completely filled with matter. Different bodies are simply regions of this continuous extended substance that move relative to one another. The observable differences between various materials, why gold differs from water, why iron differs from air, arise not from different substantial forms, but from different arrangements and motions of matter. Descartes envisioned matter as indefinitely divisible into corpuscles or particles of various sizes and shapes. These corpuscles, though not indivisible atoms, Descartes rejected atomism, constitute the functional units that interact through contact and collision. The properties of macroscopic objects, their hardness, liquidity, transparency, color, taste, all reduced to geometric and kinematic properties of their constituent corpuscles, the sizes, shapes, arrangements, and motions of tiny particles. To illustrate his mechanical method, Descartes provided detailed explanations of specific natural phenomena using only matter and motion. In his meteorology, he explained properties of salt mechanically, why salt tastes sharp, why salty water evaporates differently than fresh water, and so forth, by describing the shapes and motions of salt particles. Salt tastes sharp, he proposed, because its particles have pointed, needle-like shapes that literally prick the tongue when dissolved. Salty water evaporates more slowly, because salt particles obstruct the escape of water particles. Whether these specific hypotheses are correct matters less than the methodological point. Complex phenomena receive explanations through simple mechanical principles without invoking mysterious qualities or purposes. Central to Descartes' mechanistic physics were his three laws of motion, which represented groundbreaking contributions to the development of modern science. These laws would later serve as models for Isaac Newton's own laws of motion, which became foundational to classical mechanics. Descartes' first law states that each thing, as far as is in its power, always remains in the same state, and that consequently, when it is once moved, it always continues to move. This law introduced the revolutionary concept of inertia, the principle that bodies naturally maintain their state of motion or rest unless acted upon by external causes. Before Descartes, the prevailing view held that motion required continuous explanation, that moving bodies naturally tended toward rest. Descartes overthrew this ancient assumption, recognizing motion and rest as equally natural states requiring no further explanation beyond the absence of external interference. The second law specified that all movement is, of itself, along straight lines. Bodies in motion naturally travel in straight lines unless deflected by external causes. This law, combined with the first, established rectilinear inertial motion as the default state of moving bodies. The third law addressed collisions and interactions between bodies, stating that when bodies collide, the total quantity of motion in the system remains constant. Descartes defined quantity of motion as the product of a body's size and speed, an early version of what would later become the principle of conservation of momentum. Descartes grounded these laws not merely in empirical observation, but in metaphysical principles derived from God's nature. God created the universe with a certain quantity of motion and continuously preserves that same quantity through time. Since God is unchanging and constant, the total motion in the universe must likewise remain constant. This divine conservation principle provided theological justification for the physical laws governing matter and motion. The scope of Descartes' mechanistic explanation extended remarkably far, encompassing not just inanimate matter, but also living bodies, including animals and even human physiology. He argued that animal bodies operate entirely mechanically, as complex biological machines whose behavior requires no appeal to consciousness, sensation, or mental states. Animals, in Descartes' controversial view, are automata, sophisticated mechanisms whose apparently purposeful behaviors result entirely from mechanical causes. When a dog appears to experience pain or pleasure, these are not genuine mental experiences, but purely mechanical responses, like a clock chiming or a water fountain spraying. Human physiology, too, could be explained mechanistically. Descartes made significant contributions to understanding biological processes through mechanical principles. He correctly described the circulation of blood, building on William Harvey's work, explained reflexes as automatic mechanical responses, and theorized about sensory perception as mechanical processes involving the transmission of motion from sense organs to the brain. Digestion, respiration, growth, and virtually all bodily functions could, in principle, be understood as mechanical processes. However, Descartes drew a crucial line at the human mind. While the human body operates mechanically like animal bodies, the human soul, or mind, residential cogitans, remains fundamentally non-mechanical. Consciousness, rational thought, free will, and genuine understanding cannot be reduced to matter in motion. The mind represents the one domain of reality that escapes mechanical explanation, the one aspect of human existence that transcends the machine-like operations of the physical world. This exception preserved human dignity, moral responsibility, and spiritual significance in an otherwise mechanistic universe. The historical significance of Descartes' mechanistic worldview can hardly be overstated. It laid crucial groundwork for the scientific revolution that transformed European intellectual life in the 17th century. By demonstrating that natural phenomena could be explained through mathematical laws and mechanical principles rather than purposes and substantial forms, Descartes helped establish the methodological foundations of modern physics. His work influenced nearly every major scientist and natural philosopher who followed. Christian Huygens developed wave theory of light within a Cartesian framework. Baruch Spinoza extended Cartesian metaphysics in new directions. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz formulated his physics partly in response to Cartesian mechanics, and Isaac Newton, though ultimately rejecting many specific Cartesian hypotheses, built his revolutionary physics on foundations that Descartes had helped establish. Descartes' mechanical philosophy also transformed the relationship between mathematics and physics. By insisting that physical phenomena must be explained through quantifiable properties like size, shape, and motion, he made mathematics essential to natural philosophy. His own contributions to mathematics, particularly his development of analytic geometry, which unified algebra and geometry, provided powerful tools for this mathematical physics. The Cartesian vision of nature as a mathematical machine became a defining characteristic of modern science. Moreover, the mechanistic worldview had profound cultural and philosophical implications beyond physics. It suggested that the natural world operates according to impersonal, universal laws discoverable by human reason rather than inscrutable divine purposes. This perspective encouraged the development of experimental science, technological innovation, and the conviction that humans could understand and potentially control nature through scientific knowledge. The mechanical philosophy also raised profound questions about the nature of life, consciousness, and human uniqueness that continue to resonate in contemporary debates about artificial intelligence, the mind-brain relationship, and what distinguishes humans from sophisticated machines. Through his mechanistic physics, Descartes provided a radically new vision of the material world, one stripped of purposes, forms, and mysterious qualities, replaced by the elegant simplicity of matter in motion following mathematical laws. Whether examining planetary orbits, the properties of light, the behavior of magnets, or the workings of living bodies, Cartesian physics offered a unified explanatory framework based on a few simple principles. This mechanistic revolution fundamentally altered humanity's understanding of nature and established the conceptual foundations upon which modern science would be built. Principle 7. Innate ideas and rationalism. Among the foundational principles that define Rene Descartes' philosophical system, his doctrine of innate ideas stands as both one of the most distinctive and one of the most philosophically consequential. This principle asserts a radical claim about the origin and nature of human knowledge. Certain fundamental ideas and concepts are not derived from sensory experience, but are instead innate, born within us, present in the mind from birth as part of our rational nature itself. These innate ideas include some of our most important concepts: the idea of God as an infinite, perfect being, mathematical truths and geometric principles, logical axioms, and the fundamental metaphysical concepts that structure our understanding of reality. By arguing that the mind comes pre-equipped with this conceptual apparatus, Descartes positioned himself as the paradigmatic rationalist philosopher, someone who maintains that reason, rather than sensory experience, constitutes the primary and most reliable source of genuine knowledge. The doctrine of innate ideas emerged directly from Descartes' broader epistemological project, and his response to the problem of knowledge that his method of systematic doubt created. Having stripped away all beliefs based on potentially unreliable sensory experience, Descartes needed to explain how the mind could possess certain clear and distinct ideas that serve as the foundation for rebuilding knowledge. If all ideas came from experience, and experience itself had been cast into doubt, then no certain knowledge would be possible. The solution lay in recognizing that some ideas have their source not in external experience, but in the very nature of the mind itself. Descartes developed a systematic classification of ideas based on their origins. In his Meditations on First Philosophy, he divides all ideas into three fundamental categories: innate ideas, adventitious ideas, and factitious ideas. Adventitious ideas are those that appear to come from outside the mind through sensory experience. Ideas like the warmth of fire, the brightness of the sun, or the sound of thunder. These ideas seem to arise independently of our will. We cannot choose whether to feel heat when sitting near a fire or to see light when opening our eyes in daylight. Factitious ideas are those invented or constructed by the imagination through combining elements of other ideas. Like the idea of a mermaid, combining features of humans and fish, or a golden mountain, combining the ideas of gold and mountain. Innate ideas, by contrast, have their origin in the mind's own nature. As Descartes writes, "My understanding of what a thing is, what truth is, and what thought is seems to derive simply from my own nature." These ideas are not learned from experience, nor are they fabricated by imagination. They are fundamental concepts that the mind possesses inherently by virtue of being a rational, thinking substance. The most celebrated example of an innate idea in Descartes' philosophy is the idea of God. Descartes argues in his third meditation that his idea of God, conceived as an infinite, supremely perfect being possessing all perfections to an infinite degree, cannot have originated from sensory experience. He has never seen, heard, touched, tasted, or smelled God, which would be required if the idea were adventitious. Moreover, the idea cannot be factitious, a construction of his imagination, because finite minds cannot genuinely construct the concept of actual infinity from finite materials. At best, human imagination can conceive of potential infinity, something that can always be extended further. But the idea of God represents actual, completed infinity. Since Descartes possesses this idea despite being unable to acquire it through experience or construct it through imagination, it must be innate, placed in his mind by God himself, like a craftsman's signature stamped upon his creation. Mathematical and geometric truths constitute another crucial category of innate knowledge. Descartes regarded mathematical ideas as paradigm examples of innate ideas precisely because they possess a necessity and certainty that sensory experience could never provide. Consider the proposition that 2 plus 3 equals 5, or that a triangle necessarily has 3 sides, or that the angles of a triangle sum to 180 degrees. These truths hold universally and necessarily. They cannot be otherwise. No amount of sensory experience can account for this necessity. You might observe that every triangle you've encountered has 3 sides, but such observations could never warrant the belief that triangles must have 3 sides, that it's impossible for a triangle to have any other number. The necessity belongs to the idea itself as grasped by pure intellect, not to any contingent features of the physical world. As Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, a later rationalist heavily influenced by Descartes, eloquently explained, "The senses, although they are necessary for all our actual knowledge, are not sufficient to give us the whole of it, since the senses never give anything but instances, that is to say particular or individual truths, necessary truths, such as we find in pure mathematics, and particularly in arithmetic and geometry, must have principles whose proof does not depend on instances, nor, consequently, on the testimony of the senses. Mathematical knowledge possesses a universality and necessity that transcends anything sensory experience could deliver. Logical principles similarly count as innate knowledge for Descartes. Fundamental logical truths like the principle of non-contradiction. Nothing can both be and not be in the same respect at the same time. The principle that something cannot come from nothing, and basic rules of inference are not learned from experience, but grasped directly by the rational intellect. These principles are presupposed in all reasoning, including the reasoning by which we might try to justify them. They constitute the foundational axioms of thought itself, built into the structure of rational mind. Descartes also counted certain metaphysical concepts among the innate ideas. The idea of mind or thinking substance, residential cogitans, the idea of body or extended substance, residential extensor, and according to some interpretations, the idea of the union between mind and body, all originate in the mind's own nature rather than from external sources. These fundamental ontological categories structure our understanding of reality and make other experiences intelligible. A crucial aspect of Descartes' doctrine requires careful understanding. When he claims that certain ideas are innate, he does not mean that infants consciously possess fully formed concepts from birth. Descartes explicitly addressed this potential misunderstanding in his comments on a certain broadsheet and in his replies to objections. He wrote, "When we say that an idea is innate in us, we do not mean that it is always there before us. This would mean that no idea was innate. We simply mean that we have within ourselves the faculty of summoning up the idea. Innateness refers to an innate capacity or faculty, a natural disposition to form certain concepts when appropriately triggered by experience. Think of innate ideas like an inherited trait that requires certain conditions to manifest. Someone might have an innate disposition toward a particular talent or characteristic that only reveals itself later in life, when circumstances activate it. Similarly, the mind possesses innate conceptual capacities that experience occasions or triggers, but experience does not create the concepts or provide their content. The role of experience is to awaken or bring to consciousness what was already present potentially in the mind's rational nature. This understanding of innateness helps explain the crucial epistemic role that innate ideas play in Descartes' system. Recent scholarly interpretations have emphasized that innate ideas serve as foundational concepts that make other things intelligible. Consider how the innate idea of extension, body, functions. When you have a sensory experience of seeing the sun as a round, yellow object in the sky, your sensory experience alone doesn't provide the concept of spatial extension. You need the innate idea of extension to interpret the sensory data as representing an extended object with shape and size. The innate idea underlies and informs your perceptual experience, making it possible to experience things as extended, shaped objects in space. Without innate ideas serving this foundational role, sensory experiences would be unintelligible, mere incomprehensible sensations, rather than meaningful perceptions of a structured world. The doctrine of innate ideas positioned Descartes squarely within the rationalist philosophical tradition. Rationalism, in its most general form, maintains that reason rather than sensory experience is the primary source of knowledge, and that the mind possesses certain capacities for grasping truth that operate independently of experience. This stands in direct contrast to empiricism, the competing epistemological position that would be developed most fully by later British philosophers like John Locke, George Berkeley, and David Hume. Empiricists rejected the doctrine of innate ideas, arguing instead that the mind at birth is like a tabula rasa, a blank slate, upon which experience writes. According to empiricist doctrine, all ideas ultimately derive from sensory experience or from reflection on the mind's operations as experienced. John Locke dedicated the entire first book of his essay concerning human understanding to refuting the doctrine of innate ideas and knowledge, arguing that even if such knowledge existed, it would be unnecessary since experience could account for all our concepts. For Descartes and other rationalists, however, the empiricist account could never adequately explain the full range of human knowledge. How could mere sensory experience, which only reveals how things contingently happen to be, ever provide knowledge of how things must necessarily be? How could observing particular instances ever warrant belief in universal, necessary truths? The rationalist answer is that the most certain and important knowledge comes not from without, but from within, from the mind's own rational capacities and the innate conceptual framework that structures all understanding. The doctrine of innate ideas also explains why mathematics and logic provide certain knowledge. These disciplines don't depend on uncertain sensory observations, but on innate ideas and principles that reflect the structure of reality itself. When we engage in mathematical reasoning, we're not making empirical discoveries about the contingent physical world, but uncovering necessary truths that follow from the very nature of mathematical concepts that are innate to the rational mind. The certainty of mathematics stems from its independence from experience, and its foundation in clear and distinct innate ideas grasped by pure intellect. This principle carries profound implications for Descartes' entire philosophical system. It establishes that human beings possess a kind of direct intellectual access to fundamental truths about reality, access that doesn't depend on the potentially fallible senses, but operates through the mind's own rational nature. It suggests that the deepest, most certain knowledge comes not from looking outward at the world through our senses, but from looking inward through rational introspection and analysis. The historical influence of Descartes' doctrine of innate ideas extended far beyond his own philosophical system. It helped define one of the central debates in modern philosophy, the rationalism versus empiricism dispute that dominated epistemology throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. This debate shaped the work of virtually every major philosopher in the early modern period, from Spinoza and Leibniz on the rationalist side to Locke, Berkeley, and Hume on the empiricist side. Even Immanuel Kant's revolutionary critical philosophy, which attempted to synthesize insights from both traditions, took the rationalist-empiricist debate over innate ideas as a primary point of departure. Through his principle of innate ideas, Descartes articulated a vision of human rationality as possessing intrinsic conceptual resources that make knowledge possible. Rather than being purely receptive vessels that passively absorb information from experience, human minds actively contribute the fundamental conceptual framework, the innate ideas, through which experience becomes intelligible and knowledge achievable. This active, rationalist conception of mind continues to influence contemporary debates in philosophy of mind, cognitive science, and linguistics, where questions about innate mental structures versus learned concepts remain very much alive. Principle 8. The pursuit of absolute certainty. At the very heart of Rene Descartes' philosophical enterprise lies a single, unwavering ambition that animates every aspect of his thought: the pursuit of absolute certainty. This commitment represents far more than mere intellectual preference or methodological choice. It constitutes the defining characteristic of Cartesian philosophy and the driving force behind his revolutionary approach to knowledge. Unlike philosophers content with probable opinions, plausible hypotheses, or practically useful beliefs, Descartes demanded something far more rigorous. Foundations for knowledge that could withstand any possible doubt, principles so secure that no skeptical challenge could ever shake them. This extraordinary standard, what he called perfect certainty or absolute indubitability, meant requiring knowledge claims to be utterly immune to doubt, impossible to question even under the most extreme skeptical scenarios. Descartes articulated this commitment explicitly throughout his writings. In his Discourse on Method, he explained that his goal was to accept nothing as true that he did not clearly know to be such, to include nothing in his judgments beyond what presented itself to his mind so clearly and distinctly that he had no occasion to doubt it. In the Meditations, he emphasized that he aimed to reach certainty, to cast aside the loose earth and sand, so as to come upon rock or clay. Unlike skeptics who doubt merely for the sake of doubting, remaining permanently suspended in uncertainty, Descartes employed doubt as a tool, a means to the ultimate end of discovering absolutely certain foundations upon which to build genuine knowledge. This extraordinarily high epistemic standard distinguished Descartes from virtually all his predecessors. Medieval scholastic philosophers had been satisfied with knowledge that achieved high probability or coherence with religious doctrine. Renaissance humanists valued eloquence, wisdom, and practical judgment without necessarily demanding mathematical certainty. Even many early modern thinkers pursued knowledge that seemed reliable without requiring absolute indubitability. Descartes rejected all these more modest epistemic ambitions. For him, anything less than absolute certainty remained vulnerable to skeptical doubt and therefore unsuitable as a foundation for genuine science. The requirement for absolute certainty fundamentally shaped Descartes' entire methodology. It explains why he employed the extreme method of systematic doubt, temporarily treating as false anything that could be doubted even slightly. It explains why he rejected sensory experience as a foundation for knowledge, since the senses sometimes deceive and therefore cannot provide absolute certainty. It explains his embrace of mathematical reasoning as the model for philosophical demonstration, since geometry achieves the kind of certainty he sought. It explains his rationalist conviction that genuine knowledge must come from clear and distinct perceptions grasped by pure intellect rather than confused sensory impressions. Every distinctive feature of Cartesian epistemology flows from this central commitment to absolute certainty. The pursuit of certainty also motivated Descartes' ambitious architectural vision for organizing all human knowledge into a unified, systematic structure. In one of philosophy's most famous metaphors, presented in the preface to the French edition of his Principles of Philosophy, Descartes compared philosophy to a tree. The whole of philosophy, he wrote, is like a tree whose roots are metaphysics, whose trunk is physics, and whose branches, which issue from this trunk, are all the other sciences. He specified that these branch sciences may be reduced to three principal ones, namely medicine, mechanics, and morals. This organic metaphor conveyed profound insights about Descartes' vision for human knowledge. First, it illustrated the fundamental dependence of all sciences upon metaphysics as their root system. Just as a tree draws nourishment and stability from its roots, all genuine scientific knowledge must draw its certainty and justification from metaphysical foundations. For Descartes, metaphysics, particularly the certain knowledge of one's own existence, the cogito, God's existence, and the real distinction between mind and body, provides the absolutely secure epistemological foundation that makes all other knowledge possible. Without these metaphysical roots firmly established in absolutely certain ground, the entire tree of knowledge would topple. Second, physics constitutes the trunk, the main body growing directly from the metaphysical roots and serving as the support structure for all the branch sciences. Descartes' mechanistic physics, based on his doctrine that matter is identical with extension and that all physical phenomena can be explained through matter in motion following mathematical laws, provides the general principles that the applied sciences then specify and apply. The trunk of physics is solid and substantial precisely because it grows from the secure metaphysical roots and inherits their certainty. Third, the branch sciences, medicine, mechanics, and morals, ethics, represent the practical applications of physical principles to specific domains. These sciences grow out of the trunk, in the sense that they apply general physical principles to understand particular phenomena. Medicine applies physics to understand and heal the human body. Mechanics applies physics to construct useful machines, and morals, as Descartes conceived it, would apply physics and metaphysics to understand human nature and determine how to live well. Descartes emphasized that these branches bear the fruits of philosophy, the practical benefits that make knowledge valuable for human life. The applied sciences represent where philosophy becomes useful, improving medicine, enabling technological innovation, and guiding moral conduct. The tree metaphor also revealed Descartes' conviction that knowledge forms a unified system rather than a collection of disconnected disciplines. All the sciences connect organically, drawing their certainty from common roots and sharing fundamental principles. This unified vision stood in marked contrast to the fragmented state of learning in Descartes' time, where different subjects were taught according to different authorities and methods without systematic integration. Descartes proposed that all knowledge could and should flow from clear, certain first principles through rigorous deductive reasoning. The entire edifice of human knowledge should be reconstructed systematically, starting from absolutely certain metaphysical foundations and proceeding step by step through physics to the applied sciences. This vision required that knowledge be built from the ground up, through pure reason, rather than accumulated piecemeal through authority, tradition, or trial and error. Just as a building requires stable foundations before walls and floors can be constructed, the sciences require secure metaphysical foundations before physical and practical knowledge can be developed. Just as geometric theorems must be proven from axioms through valid deduction, scientific truths must be demonstrated from metaphysical first principles through clear reasoning. This methodical, systematic approach to knowledge construction became a hallmark of Cartesian philosophy and a model for subsequent scientific and philosophical inquiry. Descartes acknowledged that this grand project would require careful, methodical execution. One cannot simply rush to build the entire tree of knowledge at once. The proper order must be followed. First, establish the metaphysical roots with absolute certainty. Second, develop physics on these foundations. Third, construct the applied sciences based on physical principles. Descartes himself devoted much of his career to laying the metaphysical foundations in works like the Meditations and Principles, developing mechanistic physics in works like the World and later parts of the Principles, and beginning to explore applications in works on optics, meteorology, and physiology. He viewed this as just the beginning of a project that would require many minds and many generations to complete. The historical significance of Descartes' pursuit of absolute certainty and his vision of unified, systematic knowledge extended far beyond his own philosophical system. His approach became a defining aspiration of the Enlightenment, the intellectual movement that dominated 18th century European thought. Enlightenment thinkers embraced Descartes' conviction that human reason, properly employed, could achieve certain knowledge of nature and humanity. They shared his vision of systematizing all knowledge according to rational principles. They adopted his methodical approach of subjecting all claims to rational scrutiny and accepting only what could be clearly demonstrated. Descartes' rationalist system, with its emphasis on individual rational inquiry free from the constraints of authority and tradition, helped inspire Enlightenment ideals of intellectual autonomy and progress. His mechanical philosophy, which explained natural phenomena through mathematical laws rather than divine purposes, contributed to the secularization of natural philosophy and the development of modern science. His tree of knowledge metaphor inspired later attempts to systematize human knowledge, most famously the French encyclopedia edited by Denis Diderot and Jean-Le d'Alembert, which aimed to organize all human knowledge in a systematic, rational framework. The Cartesian ideal of certainty also profoundly influenced modern philosophy more broadly. Descartes established epistemology, the study of knowledge and justification, as a central preoccupation of philosophy. By making the question, what can we know with certainty, foundational, he set the agenda for subsequent philosophers throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. Rationalists like Spinoza and Leibniz embraced and extended his pursuit of certain systematic knowledge derived from clear first principles. Empiricists like Locke, Berkeley, and Hume challenged his specific claims, but largely accepted his framing of epistemology around questions of certainty and foundations. Even Kant's revolutionary critical philosophy, which ultimately argued that Descartes' quest for absolute certainty was too ambitious, took the Cartesian project as its starting point. Moreover, Descartes' emphasis on methodical, systematic reasoning as the path to certain knowledge helped establish the characteristic style and aspiration of modern philosophy. Philosophy became increasingly concerned with method, with carefully articulating procedures for arriving at truth. It became more systematic, attempting to derive comprehensive worldviews from clearly stated first principles. It became more ambitious in its epistemic goals, seeking demonstrative certainty rather than settling for probable opinion. These characteristics, all rooted in Descartes' pursuit of absolute certainty, continue to mark much philosophical inquiry to this day. The Cartesian standard of certainty has also generated ongoing philosophical debate. Is absolute certainty really achievable, or even desirable, as an epistemic goal? Can we ever truly know anything with the kind of indubitability Descartes demanded? Should we require such stringent justification for knowledge claims? Or can we know things even when some theoretical possibility of doubt remains? Contemporary epistemology has largely moved toward fallibilism, the view that knowledge doesn't require absolute certainty, and that we can know things even when they're not completely indubitable. Yet the questions Descartes raised about certainty, foundations, and justification remain central to epistemological inquiry. Through his unwavering pursuit of absolute certainty, Descartes transformed philosophy from a discipline often satisfied with probable opinions and authoritative tradition into one demanding rigorous demonstration and unshakable foundations. Through his vision of knowledge as a unified system built systematically from certain first principles, he provided a model that inspired centuries of scientific and philosophical progress. Whether or not we ultimately accept his specific conclusions or share his confidence in achieving absolute certainty, Descartes' commitment to this ideal fundamentally shaped the intellectual landscape of modernity. So what's the core takeaway from Rene Descartes' philosophy? It's the audacious idea that we can rebuild all human knowledge from the ground up using reason alone, starting from the one thing we cannot doubt: our own existence as thinking beings. Descartes showed us that radical questioning, rather than being destructive, can be the path to greater certainty. His mind-body dualism, despite its problems, shaped centuries of debate about consciousness, identity, and the relationship between mind and brain, debates that continue in neuroscience and philosophy of mind today. His mechanistic worldview helped launch the scientific revolution and modern physics, and his emphasis on mathematical reasoning as the key to understanding nature remains fundamental to science. Whether you agree with his conclusions or not, Descartes fundamentally changed how we think about thinking itself. He made the individual rational mind the ultimate arbiter of truth, paving the way for Enlightenment ideals of intellectual autonomy and scientific progress. What do you think about Descartes' philosophy? Can we really doubt everything except our own existence? Is the mind truly separate from the body? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more deep dives into the minds that shaped our world.